Imagine walking into a store for something as simple as a carton of milk, and walking out accused of a crime you didn't commit. One moment, you're just a kid running an errand, and the next, the whole world is watching. But what happens when your story becomes bigger than you ever imagined? Stay with us as we uncover the shocking truth behind one boy's life-changing moment. If this story moves you, make sure to like, subscribe, and share, because voices like his deserve to be heard. James J. Miller had always known that life wasn't fair, but nothing had prepared him for the moment when the world would treat him like a criminal for simply existing. He was 12 years old, living in Atlanta, and had always been careful. His father, Marcus Miller, was an attorney, one of the best in the city. Jay had grown up hearing about injustice, about how black men had to be twice as good, twice as careful, and twice as aware of their surroundings. But hearing about it and living it were two very different things. That evening had started like any other. His mother had asked him to run to the store for some milk. His younger sister, Mia, had a fever, and they had run out. It wasn't a big deal. The corner supermarket was only a few blocks away. Jay threw on his hoodie, grabbed a few dollars from the kitchen counter, and walked out the door. His father always told him to be careful, to keep his hands visible in stores, to never run unless necessary. It was exhausting to always have to think about those things, but Jay listened. He had seen his father fight for too many people in court who hadn't been as lucky. The store was half empty when he arrived. He walked past the aisles, heading straight for the refrigerators in the back, grabbed a carton of milk, and made his way to the checkout counter. It was a simple trip, something he had done 100 times before. But that night, something was different. As he approached the register, he heard a sharp voice behind him. "Hey, you! Stop right there!" Jay turned around slowly, his heart hammering in his chest. An older white security guard, a man in his 50s with graying hair and a stiff posture, was striding toward him. The store's fluorescent lights cast long shadows across the dull linoleum floor. Jay blinked in confusion. "What's in your pockets?" the man demanded. Jay frowned. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," the guard snapped. "I saw you put something in your pocket. Empty them, now." Jay's stomach twisted. People were staring now, 2 women in line at the register, an older man near the cereal aisle. Their eyes were cold, assessing. He could feel the weight of their judgment pressing down on him. "I didn't take anything," Jay said carefully, his voice steady but laced with nerves. The cashier, a white woman in her 40s, folded her arms. "I don't know. I saw him walking around near the candy aisle earlier," she muttered under her breath. Jay's pulse quickened. "I was just grabbing milk," he said, lifting the carton slightly as if that would prove something. "That's all." "Liar," someone whispered behind him. Jay turned his head slightly and saw a woman, a customer, maybe in her 60s, shaking her head in disappointment. "I saw him shove something in his pocket. They always do." They. The word sent a chill down his spine. He wanted to scream, to tell them that he wasn't a thief, that he had done nothing wrong. But the moment he protested, he knew they would see it as guilt. His father had warned him about moments like these. "Keep your hands visible," his dad had said. "Never reach into your pockets too fast. Never argue too much, or they'll say you were resisting. Stay calm, Jay. No matter what happens, stay calm." But it was hard. It was so damn hard when people were looking at you like you didn't belong, like they had already decided you were guilty. "Come with me," the security guard ordered. Jay took a step back. "I didn't take anything." "Then you won't mind emptying your pockets," the guard said with a smirk as if he had already won. Jay's hands shook as he reached into his pockets. His fingers closed around the few crumpled dollar bills his mom had given him and the house keys. He slowly pulled them out, palms open, showing everyone. Nothing else, just money and keys. No stolen candy, no stolen anything. The guard's smirk faded slightly, but he didn't step back. "You could have ditched it somewhere," he muttered. "Kids like you are sneaky." Jay's blood boiled. "Kids like you. Are you gonna let me pay for my milk now?" he asked, forcing his voice to remain calm. The guard glared at him for a few more seconds before finally stepping aside. "Watch yourself, kid," he muttered. "Next time you might not be so lucky." Lucky. Jay clenched his jaw and turned back to the register, placing the milk on the counter. The cashier didn't meet his eyes as she rang him up. He handed over the cash, grabbed his bag, and walked out of the store. His hands were still trembling. The cold night air hit him like a slap. He wanted to scream, to cry, to throw something, but he just kept walking. He had done everything right. He hadn't stolen anything. He had been polite. He had followed the rules. And still, they had treated him like a criminal. Jay took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. He had to let it go. But he couldn't. Because what he didn't know was that someone in the store had been filming. A man near the magazine racks had recorded the entire thing on his phone. The moment Jay was accused, the moment he was forced to prove his innocence. And that video, grainy and shaky, was about to change everything. The video of Jay's humiliation inside the grocery store didn't explode overnight. At first, it was just another clip circulating among smaller social media accounts. The kind of thing that people watched, shook their heads at, and then scrolled past. It was frustrating, disappointing, but not surprising. But then something happened. A well-known activist with millions of followers reposted it with the caption, "How many more times will this happen? How many more innocent black kids have to prove they're not criminals?" This is America in 2025. That was all it took. Within hours, the views skyrocketed. Hundreds of thousands of people watched the clip, retweeted it, shared it on Instagram, and flooded the comments with outrage. The story was no longer just Jay's, it was a symbol of something bigger. He's a child. He shouldn't have to prove his innocence. That guard knew exactly what he was doing. This is profiling, plain and simple. If he were white, do you really think they would have stopped him? Jay didn't even know about the video at first. He found out the same way everyone else in his life did, through his phone blowing up with messages. At school, he could feel the change before he even checked social media. When he walked through the halls, people stared. Some whispered, others just gawked at him as if he were some kind of celebrity. By lunch, he had over 100 missed notifications. "Yo, bro, you're famous now. Is that really you in the video? Man, they did you dirty. Check Twitter, you're trending." Jay's stomach churned as he opened his phone and saw the notifications stacked up like a tidal wave. His name was everywhere. His face was on countless pages, in news articles, in discussion threads with thousands of comments. His hands clenched around his phone. He didn't ask for this. He didn't want to be famous because he was a victim. During lunch, his best friend Malik slid into the seat across from him. "Dude," he said, shaking his head, "this is wild. You see how big this is getting?" Jay nodded, not trusting himself to speak. Malik lowered his voice. "Man, my cousin said he saw you on CNN this morning. You're on the news, bro. Like, national news?" Jay swallowed hard. This wasn't just a viral moment. This was bigger than that. But not everyone saw it that way. As he stood up to dump his tray, A voice cut through the cafeteria. "Hey, Miller." Jay turned, already knowing he wasn't going to like what was coming. It was Carson, one of the guys from his math class. White, popular, and always had something slick to say. "So, Carson smirked. "When's your Netflix documentary coming out?" A few kids chuckled. Jay exhaled slowly. "What do you want, Carson?" Carson leaned back, playing it up for his audience. "Oh, nothing. Just wondering how it feels to be famous for, playing the victim." Malik shot up from his seat. "The hell is that supposed to mean?" Carson shrugged. "I mean, he didn't even get arrested or anything, just got checked. And now he's all over the internet acting like it's the biggest injustice in the world." Jay clenched his fists. "I didn't put that video up. I didn't ask for any of this." "Yeah, but you sure aren't stopping it," Carson shot back. "Enjoy the attention while it lasts, man." Jay turned and walked away, his heart pounding in his chest. That night, when he got home, his father was already waiting for him in the living room. The TV was muted, but Jay could see his own face frozen on the screen. Another news segment. Marcus Miller, one of Atlanta's top attorneys, crossed his arms. "You saw it, didn't you?" Jay sat down slowly. "Yeah." His father studied him for a long moment. "And?" Jay hesitated. "I don't know, Dad. It's weird. I don't want people looking at me like I'm some kind of victim, but I don't know." He ran a hand through his hair. "People are mad, and I get why. It's not just about me." His father nodded. "No, it's not. But now you have to decide something, Jay. What happens next? Do you let this moment pass, or do you use it?" Jay frowned. "Use it?" Marcus leaned forward. "Son, I've spent my whole career fighting cases just like this. People getting arrested, accused, discriminated against, sometimes worse. The truth is, most of the time, those cases don't get attention. But you," he gestured toward the TV, "you have the world's attention. The question is, what do you do with it?" Jay swallowed hard. "I don't know." His father's eyes softened. "I won't tell you what to do, but I will tell you this. Opportunities like this don't come often. People are listening. If you have something to say, now is the time to say it." Jay stared at the screen, at his own face frozen in time. He thought about how it felt when the security guard grabbed him, how it felt when the cashier looked at him like he was guilty before he even opened his mouth, how it felt when that woman whispered, "They always do." He had something to say. He just wasn't sure if he was ready to say it yet. Later that night, as he lay in bed, his phone buzzed again. Another message, this one from an unknown number. "Hi, Jay. This is the production team for The Tonight Show with Jimmy Fallon. Jimmy saw your story and would love to have you on the show. Please let us know if you're interested." Jay sat up in bed, staring at the message, his heart pounding. He had the world's attention. And now he had a decision to make. Jay sat on his bed, staring at his phone screen. The message from The Tonight Show with Jimmy Fallon felt surreal, like it was meant for someone else. He read it 3 times, then once more, as if the words might change. "Jimmy saw your story and would love to have you on the show. Please let us know if you're interested." Interested? How was he supposed to answer that? He wasn't an activist. He wasn't famous. He was just a kid who had been humiliated in a grocery store, and now the whole world was talking about him like he was a symbol of something bigger. And maybe he was, but he hadn't asked for this. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, but he couldn't bring himself to reply. Instead, he turned off his phone and lay back on his pillow, staring at the ceiling. The glow of the streetlights outside cast long shadows across his room. He wanted to pretend that nothing had changed, that tomorrow he could just go back to school, sit at his usual lunch table with Malik, and laugh about basketball or video games. But deep down, he knew that wasn't possible anymore. The next morning, Jay woke up to the sound of his mom talking on the phone downstairs. The hushed, urgent tone of her voice told him it was about him. He pulled on a hoodie and shuffled into the kitchen, where she was pacing near the stove, one hand on her hip. "Yes, I understand that it's a big opportunity, but he's 12, she was saying. "I don't want him being thrown into something like this without knowing exactly what he's walking into." Jay already knew who she was talking to. She turned when she saw him and gave him a look that was part concern, part exhaustion. "Hold on a moment," she said into the phone, then covered the speaker with her palm. "Jay, we need to talk." He slid into a chair at the kitchen table. "I saw the message," she sighed. "Yeah. And I know you're probably feeling a lot of things right now, but this isn't just about you anymore. People are watching, and once you step into that spotlight, you can't just step back out." "I know," Jay muttered. His father walked into the kitchen, already dressed for work, adjusting his tie. "Your mother's right," he said, grabbing a cup of coffee. "This is bigger than just a TV appearance. Once you go on that show, everything changes." Jay looked between them. "So, what are you saying? I shouldn't do it?" His mom sat down across from him, her eyes searching his face. "I'm saying, I want you to be sure. If you go on that show, you need to know why you're doing it." His dad leaned against the counter. "Son, people are going to expect you to say something meaningful. This isn't just about telling your side of the story. It's about what happens next. Are you ready for that?" Jay thought about it all day at school. He wasn't surprised when, between classes, Malik cornered him at his locker. "Yo, you're actually going on Fallon?" Jay sighed. "I don't know yet." Malik's eyes widened. "Dude, what do you mean you don't know? It's literally the biggest late-night show in the country." Jay shrugged. "Yeah, but that's just it. What if I mess up? What if I don't say the right thing?" Malik scoffed. "Man, you already said the right thing. That's why people care. Look, I get that it's scary, but you got a shot to tell the whole world what it's like being us. You gonna let that pass?" Jay knew Malik was right, but it still didn't make the decision any easier. That evening, after dinner, he sat in the living room with his parents, the TV playing in the background. His mom had made his favorite, mac and cheese with crispy bacon on top, but he barely touched his plate. His dad, noticing, set down his fork. "Still thinking about it?" Jay nodded. "What if I go on the show and just freeze?" His dad gave him a long look. "Jay, let me tell you something. The first time I ever walked into a courtroom, I was terrified. My hands were shaking so bad I thought I might drop my briefcase. But then I remembered why I was there. I wasn't in that room for myself. I was there to stand up for someone who couldn't stand up for themselves." Jay swallowed hard. "But I'm not a lawyer." "No, but you're in a position to speak for a lot of kids who don't get this chance, who don't get heard. And if you go on that stage and tell your truth, you'll be doing more than most people ever do in a lifetime." Jay looked at his mom, who gave him a soft smile. "You don't have to be perfect, baby," she said. "You just have to be honest." Later that night, he sat on his bed, his phone in his hands. The message from the show was still there, waiting for a response. He took a deep breath and started typing. "Thank you for the invitation. I'd like to come on the show." He hit send before he could change his mind. Almost instantly, a new message popped up. "That's great news. We'll arrange travel for you and your family. Looking forward to having you, Jay." Jay put his phone down and stared at the ceiling. This was happening, and whether he was ready or not, the whole world would be watching. Jay sat in the back seat of the car, staring out the window as the city lights of New York blurred past him. He still couldn't believe he was here. A week ago, he was just a kid in Atlanta trying to buy milk. Now, he was about to step onto one of the biggest stages in the country. His mom sat beside him, checking her phone while his dad was quiet, lost in thought. The tension in the car was thick, but Jay wasn't sure if it was excitement, nerves, or both. When they pulled up to the NBC studios, a production assistant was already waiting for them at the curb. She greeted them warmly, guiding them through a back entrance and into a hallway filled with buzzing energy. Jay had never been anywhere like this before. The walls were lined with framed photos of past guests, celebrities, athletes, musicians. He saw faces he recognized instantly: Barack Obama, Beyoncé, Michael Jordan, and now, somehow, his name was on tonight's lineup. A few minutes later, Jay found himself in a dressing room, sitting in front of a large mirror with bright lights circling it. His reflection stared back at him, looking just as nervous as he felt. He adjusted the cuffs of his hoodie, then let his hands rest on his lap. He was still processing everything when there was a knock at the door. It was Jimmy Fallon. The talk show host stepped in with his usual bright energy, flashing a wide grin as he walked toward Jay. "Hey, buddy, how you feeling?" Jay hesitated. Kinda nervous." Jimmy chuckled. "That's normal. First time on TV, right?" Jay nodded. Jimmy sat in the chair across from him. "Listen, I know this is a lot, but I want you to know this isn't an interrogation. It's just a conversation. You're here because people want to hear your story, and I'm here to help you tell it." Jay nodded again, feeling a little of the tension ease from his shoulders. Jimmy leaned forward. "I watched your video, man. What happened to you was unfair. But the way you've handled it, that's powerful. You didn't just let it slide. You didn't just get angry and disappear. You're standing up and speaking out. That's big." Jay swallowed. "Yeah, but what if I mess up? What if I say the wrong thing?" Jimmy smiled. "You won't. You know why? Because it's your story. Nobody can tell it better than you. Just be yourself." Jay took a deep breath. Maybe Jimmy was right. A few minutes later, an assistant knocked on the door again. 5 minutes to showtime." Jay stood up. His mom squeezed his hand and his dad placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "No matter what happens out there, son, we're proud of you." Jay swallowed the lump in his throat. "Thanks, Dad." Then he followed the assistant down the hallway. When he stepped onto the stage, the bright lights nearly blinded him. The audience erupted into applause, and for a split second, Jay froze. The cameras, the crowd, the national television audience, it was overwhelming. But then Jimmy stepped forward, shook his hand, and guided him to the chair beside the desk. "Ladies and gentlemen," Jimmy said, looking into the camera, "our next guest has been making headlines for all the wrong reasons, but he's here tonight to tell his story the right way. Please welcome James J. Miller." Another round of applause. Jay forced himself to breathe. Jimmy smiled at him. "Jay, welcome to the show." "Thanks," Jay said, his voice steadier than he expected. "All right, let's get into it. You're 12 years old, you live in Atlanta, and a week ago you were just a regular kid running errands for your mom. And then..." Jimmy paused. "What happened?" Jay exhaled. "I went to the store to buy milk for my little sister. That's it. And then the security guard stopped me. He said he saw me put something in my pocket. I hadn't. But it didn't matter. He made up his mind before I even said a word." The audience murmured. Jimmy nodded. And someone filmed the whole thing. Jay nodded. Yeah, I didn't even know at first, but then the video blew up and suddenly everyone was talking about it. Jimmy leaned in. How did that feel? Jay hesitated, choosing his words carefully. Weird. At first, I didn't know how to react. I mean, people were supporting me, but some people were saying I was playing the victim, that it wasn't a big deal. But it was a big deal to me, and to a lot of other kids who go through stuff like this and never get heard. The audience clapped. Jimmy waited a moment before continuing. You said something really important there, that this happens to a lot of kids. Have you experienced this before? Jay hesitated, then nodded. Yeah, not like this, but yeah. I've walked into stores and seen the way employees watch me. I've heard people lock their car doors when I walk by. It's little things. But after a while, you realize it's not an accident. They think I'm a threat just because of how I look. The room fell into silence. Jimmy shook his head. Jay, you're 12. You should be worried about school, about basketball, about normal kid stuff, not about proving you're not a criminal. Jay looked down at his hands. I wish it worked that way. More silence. Then Jimmy smiled slightly. Listen, I have to say, you're handling all of this with so much strength. I think a lot of people watching at home are going to learn something from you tonight. Jay felt his face heat up. He wasn't sure how to respond to that. Jimmy glanced at the audience. I also want to share some news with you, Jay. We reached out to the grocery store where this happened, and they have an official statement. Jay stiffened. The screen behind them lit up with the store's logo and a message from the owner. We sincerely regret what happened to James Miller in our store. After reviewing the footage, we recognize that our security guard acted inappropriately, and we are taking steps to improve our training to prevent incidents like this in the future. The employee involved has been terminated. The audience clapped, but Jay wasn't sure how to feel. It wasn't an apology. It was damage control. Jimmy continued. And that's not all. There's something else we wanted to do for you. We heard that your dad is an attorney and that you've been inspired by his work. So, we reached out to an organization that helps young leaders, and they want to offer you a full scholarship to any law program when the time comes. Jay's jaw dropped. The crowd cheered. His mind struggled to process the words. A scholarship? To become a lawyer? He turned to Jimmy, completely at a loss. Are you serious? Jimmy grinned. 100%. Jay swallowed hard. His parents were in the audience, and he saw his mom wiping at her eyes. His dad was nodding, his expression unreadable, but Jay knew what it meant. Pride. He turned back to Jimmy. Thank you, he said, his voice thick. Jimmy smiled. No, Jay, thank you for speaking up. The audience erupted into applause. As Jay sat there, letting it all sink in, he realized something. His voice mattered, and he wasn't done using it yet. Jay sat in the back seat of the car as they drove away from the studio, his mind still reeling from everything that had just happened. The lights, the cameras, the audience, the applause, it had all felt surreal. He had just been on national television, sharing his story with millions of people. And then there was the scholarship. That part still didn't seem real. He had never even thought that far ahead. His mom kept glancing at him from the front seat, her face a mixture of pride and concern. His father sat silently beside her, staring out the window, his jaw tight. Jay could tell his dad had something on his mind, but he didn't say anything. Not yet. His phone was buzzing non-stop. Messages, notifications, comments. He scrolled through a few. Jay, you're incredible. Thank you for speaking up. This kid is the future. That was powerful. Keep going, Jay. But then there were others. He's just a kid. Why are we making such a big deal out of this? Another sob story to make people feel guilty. If he didn't act suspicious, this wouldn't have happened in the first place. Jay locked his phone and exhaled. He had expected this. His dad had warned him about it. Not everyone was going to be on his side. Some people would always look for a reason to doubt him, to downplay what happened. They arrived back at the hotel, and as soon as they stepped into the quiet lobby, his father finally spoke. "Let's talk." Jay followed his parents into their room and sat down on the couch. His dad leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "You did good tonight, son." Jay waited. He knew there was more. "But I need you to understand something," his dad continued. "This doesn't end here. You stepped into something much bigger than yourself. People are going to have opinions. Some will support you. Others will try to tear you down. And the bigger your voice gets, the more people will want to silence you." Jay nodded slowly. "I know." His dad studied him. "Do you?" Jay hesitated. He wasn't sure. He had wanted to tell his story, to speak up, but now he realized this wasn't just about him anymore. It never had been. His mom sighed and sat down beside him. "We're proud of you, baby. So proud. But you have to be ready for what comes next. You have to decide how much of yourself you're willing to put out there." Jay swallowed. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do." His dad leaned back. "That's up to you. But whatever you decide, just know we've got your back." The next morning, when Jay woke up, his phone was still blowing up. News outlets were talking about his interview. His face was on headlines. But what caught his attention the most was the statement from the grocery store. They had fired the security guard. They had apologized. They had promised to implement training. But something about it didn't sit right with him. It wasn't enough. His dad walked into the room, already dressed. "You see the statement?" Jay nodded. "Yeah, but it doesn't change anything, does it?" His father sat down across from him. "No, not really, but it's a start." Jay looked down at his phone. He wasn't done. He couldn't be. Not when there were so many other kids who went through the same thing and never got heard. He opened his messages and started typing. "Thank you to everyone who has supported me. But this isn't just about me. It's about every kid who has been judged before they even got the chance to speak. This conversation isn't over." He hit send, and just like that, he knew. This was just the beginning. Jay returned home to Atlanta feeling different. The city looked the same, his neighborhood looked the same, but something inside him had shifted. He wasn't just James Miller, the kid who went to Jefferson Middle School. He was Jay Miller, the boy from The Tonight Show, the one whose story had gone viral, the one people either supported or criticized, and there was no going back to how things were before. When he walked into school on Monday morning, he could feel the weight of all the eyes on him. Some kids whispered as he passed. Others came up to him, patting his back, saying things like, "Man, that was crazy. You were on TV." Or, "You're famous now." Mullock met him at his locker, grinning. "Dude, everyone's talking about you." Jay sighed. "Yeah, I noticed." Malik leaned against the lockers. "You okay?" Jay hesitated, then shrugged. "I don't know. It's weird." Malik nodded. "Well, you did something big. People are going to react." Jay knew that was true. He just didn't expect how people would react, because while some kids were supportive, others weren't. And he found that out in third period, when Carson decided to speak up again. "So, Miller," Carson said, loud enough for the whole class to hear, "how's it feel being a celebrity?" Jay didn't answer. Carson smirked. You know, I watched that interview of yours. You got a whole scholarship just for getting checked at a grocery store? That's gotta be the easiest way to get paid I've ever seen." A few kids chuckled. Jay clenched his jaw. He could feel the heat rising in his chest, but he forced himself to stay calm. His dad had warned him about moments like this. People will try to downplay what happened. Don't let them. "I didn't ask for any of this," Jay said evenly. Carson shrugged. "Didn't stop you from taking the free money, though." Jay gritted his teeth. He wanted to say something. He wanted to shut Carson down. But he knew no matter what he said, kids like Carson would always find a way to twist it. So he didn't give him the satisfaction. He turned away, ignoring him completely. Carson scoffed. "Whatever, man. Just don't act like you're some kind of hero." Jay didn't react, but inside, the words hit hard. At lunch, he sat with Malik, who immediately shook his head. "Man, Carson is such a clown. You should have roasted him." Jay exhaled. "Nah, that's what he wants. He wants me to react so he can say I'm too sensitive, or making it a big deal. I'm not playing that game." Malik grinned. "You're smarter than me. I would have said something dumb and gotten detention." Jay managed a small laugh. "I thought about it." But Carson's words stuck with him. Because the truth was, Jay didn't feel like a hero. He hadn't done anything except tell the truth about what happened to him. And yet, some people acted like he had scammed his way into attention. As if racial profiling wasn't real. As if kids like him didn't deal with this every single day. That night, Jay sat in his room, scrolling through his phone. The comments on his social media were a mix of support and hate. "Thank you for speaking out, Jay. You're inspiring so many people. This happens all the time and no one talks about it. Keep using your voice." "Here we go again. Another kid playing the race card for sympathy. Maybe if you didn't look suspicious, they wouldn't have stopped you." Jay's stomach twisted. He tossed his phone onto his bed, frustration bubbling inside him. He hated this feeling. This helplessness. A knock at the door made him look up. His dad stepped inside, arms crossed. "Rough day?" Jay sighed. "Yeah." His dad sat down in the chair across from his bed. "Carson giving you trouble?" Jay smirked slightly. "You already know." Marcus chuckled. "I was in middle school once too, you know." Jay hesitated, then leaned forward. "Dad, do you ever feel like no matter what you do, people will still think the worst of you?" His father's expression softened. "All the time, son." Jay exhaled. "So, what do you do?" Marcus was quiet for a moment before answering. "I remember why I started in the first place. I remember that my truth doesn't need validation from people who don't want to hear it, and neither does yours." Jay nodded slowly. His dad stood up. "People like Carson, they don't want to understand. But there are a lot of people who do. Keep talking to them." Jay sat with that thought for a while after his dad left. Maybe he wasn't a hero. But that didn't mean he was going to stop. The conversation wasn't over. Not even close. Jay sat at his desk, staring at the blank screen of his phone. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, but he wasn't sure what to say. The past few weeks had been a whirlwind. He had gone from being just another kid in Atlanta to someone the world was watching. He had spoken on national television, received overwhelming support, and been offered a scholarship that could change his future. But he had also been called a liar, a manipulator, and worse. He had been told that what happened to him wasn't real, that he was playing the victim, that he should just be grateful and move on. But how could he move on when nothing had really changed? The security guard at the store had been fired, But Jay knew another one just like him would take his place. The store had apologized, but only because they had no choice. And there were still kids like him, walking into stores, classrooms, and neighborhoods, being seen as threats before they even opened their mouths. Jay took a deep breath and started typing. Thank you to everyone who has supported me. But this isn't just about me. This is about every kid who has been judged before they even got the chance to speak. This conversation isn't over. He hesitated for only a second before hitting send. Within minutes, the post was already getting shares, likes, comments, some positive, some negative. He expected that. He was ready for it now. His dad knocked on the door and stepped inside. You all right? Jay nodded. Yeah, just thinking. Marcus sat down in the chair across from him, studying him carefully. You're doing something important, Jay, but it's not always going to be easy. I know, Jay said. I don't want this to be just a moment. I don't want people to forget and move on like it never happened. His father smiled. Then don't let them. Jay looked up. How? Marcus leaned forward. You have a voice now, and not just because of what happened to you, but because of what you did with it. That's power. Use it. Jay let those words sink in. The next day at school, he felt the weight of the stairs again, but this time it didn't feel as heavy. He walked through the halls with his head high, not because he was famous, but because he knew who he was. At lunch, Malik slid into the seat across from him. Saw your post. You're really not letting this go, huh? Jay shook his head. Nope. Malik grinned. Good, 'cause I've got an idea. Jay raised an eyebrow. Oh, no. Malik laughed. Relax, man. I was thinking, you ever thought about speaking at schools? Like, not just ours. Other ones, too. Talking to kids like us about what it's like, about what happened to you. Jay blinked. He hadn't thought about that. You think people would listen? He asked. Malik scoffed. Dude, the whole country already listened to you once. Why would they stop now? Jay considered it. He had never seen himself as a public speaker, but maybe that didn't matter. Maybe what mattered was that he had something to say. Yeah, he said slowly, maybe I will. Malik grinned. That's what I'm talking about. Jay sat back in his chair, staring out the cafeteria window. The world hadn't changed overnight. It might not change for a long time, but that didn't mean he would stop trying. This wasn't just his story anymore, and he wasn't going to be silent. Not now, not ever. Jay's story is just one of many, but it proves a powerful truth. Your voice matters. Injustice doesn't disappear overnight, but as long as we keep speaking up, we can create real change. What do you think about his journey? Have you ever witnessed or experienced something similar? Let's talk in the comments. If you believe in standing up for what's right, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share this story, because awareness is the first step to change.